FutureDad 52, The Long End of the Longhouse. Quote, "Women are realizing that only collective strength and action will allow us to be free to fight for the kind of society that meets basic human needs." Roxanne Dunbar. Roxanne Dunbar was a renowned feminist social activist in the 60s and 70s. The above quote of hers is useful to consider because it neatly captures the goggle-eyed determination of feminism. In this essay I will explore her ideology, how it led to the Longhouse, and how the Longhouse will end. The specific topics are 1. The origins of feminism. 2. Current year feminism. 3. The Longhouse. 4. How do we know the Longhouse will fall? 5. What the fall will look like. 6. Ex ante post-mortem. 1. The origins of feminism. I covered this in several essays before, but I will summarise here. I choose a starting point of the early 1900s, and not before then, for a specific reason. Feminism itself came from the 19th century egalitarianism, but whose ultimate origins are in dispute. Feminism itself came from 19th century egalitarianism, but whose ultimate origins are in dispute. Philosophically, egalitarianism seems to follow the Heraclitus, Plato, Kant, Hegel, Marx pathway. Religiously, egalitarianism came from a series of great awakenings in the US in the 18th and 19th centuries. These endorsed the idea that each person deserves a personal relationship with God, therefore everyone should be equal. French. More trivially, the word feminism comes from the French in the 1870s. The great historian David Starkey would say, tongue-in-cheek, all bad ideas are French. That's good enough for me. So, whatever are its earliest origins, whether religious or philosophical or just simply French, let's start there. Right around the time when egalitarianism birthed feminism proper in the early 20th century. A notable hallmark of this birth was the suffragette movement in the UK. In the 1910s, British feminists nagged, agitated, letter-bombed, firebombed and IED'd into being given the vote, without earning it on the battlefield. 4 people died from their mostly peaceful protests, so yes, they were literal terrorists. It's important to remind people of this violence whenever discussing feminism's roots, or its original sin, universal suffrage. Simps. Why do we bow to this violent campaign by the weaker sex? Yes, you guessed it, simps. Simping male politicians and media figures who wanted to boost their mating chances indulged the suffragettes because weak men virtue signal and collectivise to achieve the reproductive goals. Collectivism is maladaptive for a virtuous and pioneering society, of course. It crowds out individualism and exceptionalism, bedrocks of liberty and genuine progress, respectively. Collectivism only now rises amongst the freedom-loving right out of resigned desperation, not authentic desire. No matter. Back then as now, no such moral concerns for humanity get in the way of a male feminist with a dry penis. When women did get the vote, the shift leftward began in earnest. The well-known first to fourth waves of feminism could be catalogued at this point. But these waves are just soft focus reframing by an academia overpopulated with post-wall misandrists and apologetic men in cardigans. The waves were not pleasant swells of water. They were dysgenic phases of state-funded progressive collectivism in women's favour. Indeed, in rapid succession after the suffragettes got their vote, came the welfare state, the NHS, civil rights, anti-Laffer taxation, third world immigration, and the beginning of the collapse of the birth rate. Free. That brings us to the 70s and Dunbar's amazing quote. Let's ponder it for a minute. The clever amongst you might read it and think, free to fight? What kind of free does that mean? Fight for what? But deep linguistic analysis is wasted here, so I'll cut to the chase. It's rhetorical nonsense. Women have had exactly the same voting rights as men for a century. They've had complete equality under the law for 7 decades. Roxanne Dunbar wrote it in 1970, nearly 2 decades after that freedom was achieved, certainly in Boston where she wrote it. She was at the vanguard of feminism. She knew that what she wanted had already been achieved, but it still wasn't enough. This is the essence of feminism. It is also the common refrain for anyone who knows women well enough through repeat experience. It is distilled in the age-old question, what does a woman want? Answer, more. 2. Current year feminism. In short, the drive for feminist equality is a clever multi-decade bait and switch. Actual equality is neither desired nor relevant when you consider the behaviour, not the words, of women. Women will complain about the choice of restaurant whilst not spending a penny for the meal. They will demand a female quota on the corporate board, but shun sewage work or manual labour. It is Schrodinger's feminism. To muzzle and defang masculinity, then demand men protect you from violence, real or imagined. Mess. As time wore on, this gargantuan tilting of the world to the benefit of women became institutionalized and endemic. Women living longer exacerbated this change and outweighed any reasonable, sensible voting. The inexorable growth of the state and bloated welfare programs continued into the 21st century. And like painting a room, you must go to the edges and corners until none of the previous colour is left. Centuries of Enlightenment era philosophy of justice had to make way for the #MeToo era of believe all women. It finally brought us to the unholy mess we're in now. If you must visualize this in one pretty picture, here is a bifurcation of the 2016 US presidential election by gender voting patterns. We have all been witness to this progressive anti-progress and the shredding of the social contract our whole lives, to the extent that it now in the 2020s touches everything we see, which brings us neatly to the Longhouse. 3. The Longhouse. Historically, a longhouse is a large, single-hall communal dwelling built since the Neolithic period. The single-hall communal distinction is key. The book Bronze Age Mindset by Bronze Age Pervert describes modern leftist men who dwell permanently in the longhouse. They are, quote, browbeaten and ruled by obese mammies who instilled in them socialism and feminism. So the term the Longhouse is the end state of the ceaseless feminization of society and all its social and institutional diktats. When we talk about biased family courts, the overimposing nanny state, medical lockdowns, promotion of mass immigration, welfare state bloat, tone policing, progressive income tax, hate crime legislation, medication of boisterous boys, safety over freedom, corporate HR, panicky weather forecasts, fat acceptance, cancel culture and DI initiatives, we are simply talking about different decrees of the Longhouse, or if you prefer, the house rules. Men didn't ask for any of this, did you? Ontologies. So, the Longhouse rules dominate our social fabric and discourse, yet normal matrix-dwelling men are so browbeaten and weak they do not notice or care. They certainly do not make a stand en masse, no million-man march to reclaim our sovereignty, and so, without meaningful resistance, society has been swallowed whole. To your garden variety blue-pilled worker drone, it may seem as if he occupies, lives and works in many buildings, buildings for business, buildings for exercise, buildings for simple rest and relaxation, but these are ontologies of an authentic, differentiated past. Whatever we do, wherever we go, we are still in a longhouse. In a decaying West, it has become our primary residence and location of all our activities. There is no home in the countryside to which we occasionally retreat. That is mere ornamentation to appear that way. The subterfuge is complete. In modern society, you never leave the Longhouse. Just like Truman Burbank, we ricochet around it, validating its rules and strictures, obeying its mistresses, appeasing its unsatisfiable thirst for power and control. Control. Sometimes it's subtle. You see headlines that X happened, woman most affected. Sometimes it's much more obvious. In 2023, the Aviva CEO Amanda Blanc said that white men have to go through an extra stage in the recruitment process. She is white, her name is white, but nonetheless, precisely because of this, white men must be punished. Always, whether overt or covert, the Longhouse is all-consuming. Its goal is power and control, offline and now online. It's interesting that the Longhouse is a house, because its online success has depended on the intentional cyber-squatting of every known property of male identity. Everything outside of that is stocked with unblinking avarice. We have reached a point where there is not a thing that men do that is not the province of women. Do it now, dear listener. Think of a thing which is definitionally male and male only. Father's Day, you say? Well, I have bad news. Mark Boguch knows he can't compete with other men. He just hopes to hang around women whilst productive men are busy competing with each other in the hope that this will get him laid. It won't, but what else can he do but simp? 4. How do we know the Longhouse will fall? Just like anything with a colossal apparatus built to hold back the forces of nature, it requires a gargantuan effort to maintain. The Hoover Dam was a huge multi-decade project in Nevada to protect the villages of the downstream basin from floods. It is underpinned by two sustaining incentives: providing clean water to millions of people and selling hydroelectric power to electricity companies. What it does is difficult enough. Hold back billions of tons of water so you can charge your phone and read this essay. But even it doesn't have to contend with an accumulating mass of water, year after year after year. That is what the Longhouse has to withstand, whilst drafting ever more resources and effort to hold back nature, logic and reason. Dead weight. This accumulated mass, some of it historical deadweight like the 1950 Equality Act, some like online censoring of the 2020s, only grows. New edicts and rules swell in size like fat bombs accreting in the water pipes below London. The competence crisis formed by the non-male hiring policies of bloated HR departments has accelerated this. Just as men were needed to save the day, they started lying flat or walking away. Even when feminist causes were paused during the Trump 2.0 presidency, cranky, oestrogen-infused departments weren't permanently purged. See FutureDad 51 reports of the death of ESG are exaggerated. The overt policies themselves may die, but the urge to be egalitarian does not. The deadweight employees squirmed and jostled for similar positions with a new name, and so they remain, pressing on the dam. 5. What the fall will look like. So far we've explored feminism's origins, its true goals and its end state, the Longhouse. This assessment should clue us into its inevitable end, an end which will be a shattering blow for those whose careers, fortune and soapboxes were built from it. A social earthquake for Western societies which formed its warped ideas of progress under its jurisdiction. Future generations will scarcely believe how much was torn asunder when it fell, because it's hard to comprehend how much of society lives in its shadow. Shock. To the common man, its collapse will seem out of nowhere and discombobulating. Sky Sports and Happy Wife, Happy Life has worked okay-ish so far, but it's a recipe for dumbfounded shock when things just stop working. Rolling blackouts, food shortages, power vacuums, parallel governments and quasi-civil war. I describe this in FutureDad 33, how and why the UK will collapse. You can have a welfare state or open borders, not both. The coming civil war will force the end of the latter and the reassessment of the former. Malaise. Matriarchal social politics as we know it will end. Virtue signalling, social preening, claims of victimhood, shaming languages, celebrity worship, pedestalizing of mids, daycare for women, and having surface level knowledge of a topic yet speaking on TV or in Parliament about it, these will stop being the norm. Left-wing talking points have been the only socially acceptable ones for decades. That is not the sign of a fully functioning society. Doesn't it strike you as odd that all this degenerate, anti-civilizational, anti-human malaise took control in the first place, without a shot fired? Fashion. Even fashion as we know it will end. I recently saw an advert inside a branch of Hollister featuring a fat woman advertising jeans. My disgust reflex told me that this woman was not reproductively acceptable, nor is this paradigm we're living in. That may seem like an extreme response to an ill-advised fashion picture, but I'm not the extremist, they are. We've gone so extremely far from normality that a woman likely to die in her 40s is used as an emblem of health. Male workforce participation is inversely proportional to female weight. One of these has to give. The all-new starvation diet will become the hot new trend. Privileges. The last and most severe injuries of the death of 1,000 cuts is the cratering fertility rate. See FutureDad 32, the fertility rate crash as one cause. Best case scenario, this will cast a shadow well into the 21st century. Nations whose demographic injuries are patched up by politicians' favourite elastoplast, third world immigration, will suffer the most. This can only end in wars, either civil or conventional or both. From these wars with no space for irony, women will have their feminist privileges, aka rights, taken away from them anyway. Incremental. But don't be confused by my language of collapse. It suggests something sudden. The Longhouse collapse will in fact be, for the most part, incremental. This will happen over months and years while we busy ourselves with downstream concerns like failing businesses, shrinkflation, giant potholes and vanishing high streets. The lesson from South Africa is that a collapse happens by degrees and inches. There is no sudden explosion. Life just gets worse, 1% a month. Then one day you notice nonchalant criminals are digging up the road to steal copper wire. There's not much in the way of predicting such things in an exact schedule. Feminism's megastructure was developed for control, not necessity. Its great unwinding may be as non-linear as it gets. Myriad useless rules and regulations must be unwound and pro-civilizational, pro-liberty governance built by men. It was a century in the making, so it will take decades to rebuild. Build back better without any boobs, mistakes or breasts. Ex ante post mortem. Then eventually we'll need to do some introspection and retrospection. We have some explaining to do to our ancestors. Just as we invented flight, we diverted our attention to the emotional pleading of our co-pilot. What the hell were we thinking? At the very least, we must bag and label the evidence clearly to make sure it never happens again. Post-collapse, post-feminist nations will have to anticipate these things. Anticipate corruption, anticipate collectivism, anticipate simping. Or they too are doomed to fail. Bottom line, government spending limits must be set resolutely in advance. See FutureDad 54, voting is futile. Conclusion. We've seen how unnatural and unhealthy the world has become via feminism. Its all-consuming end state, the Longhouse, must fall. Its fall will be a bit like Hemingway's bankruptcy, gradually, then all at once. What action can we take now? Survival favours the prepared. Exercise, plan, leave the cities, become state-proof and food independent. When the Earth faced a visit from Galactus in the Marvel comic universe, Silver Surfer said, "All that you know will come to an end." This may well be true. But unlike the cartoons, and just like a leftoid's rhetorical journey, this can, eventually, be a good thing. Future Dad.